Today I want to show you 3 simple and easy ways to make your rice look, smell, and taste better. That doesn't seem like the end of the sentence. Today I want to show you 3 different ways to make your rice more interesting with minimal effort. Hello and welcome back to cooking, and welcome to part 2 of the epic rice trilogy. In part 1, I show you how to cook and scale rice perfectly every time. Today, I want to show you 3 simple ways to pimp your rice. Oof, can I get away with that? Then at the end of the video, I want to tell you a little bit about what I have planned for part 3, the conclusion to this epic rice trilogy. That'll do. So less talking and more pimping, let's get started. First method I want to show you to make your rice more interesting is to mix different types of rice and grains together. The great thing about this method is that it doesn't take any more work than just cooking one type of rice, and it still adds more colors, textures, and flavors to your dish. Starting with white rice, I'm going to recommend you try cooking it together with quinoa. Is it quinoa or quinoa? I'm gonna go with quinoa. This is a great way to add a new texture to the rice while increasing its nutritional value. Quinoa has more protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals than any other grain of rice. It is also a good way to gently increase your fiber intake, as quinoa is very easy to digest. Now quinoa is kind of bitter, so I like to rinse it and then cook it in excess water. And since you can cook white rice in the exact same way, you can just cook them together and save some time. For this recipe, I'm using 200 grams of jasmine rice and 100 grams of quinoa. But you can use any kind of white rice you like, and you can mix the ratios whichever way you prefer. Excess water, by the way, just means cooking it in more water than the rice could absorb, kind of like how you would cook pasta. In this case, that just means at least 4 times more water than quinoa and rice. But you don't need to measure the water, you can just eyeball it. The first thing you're going to want to do is set your water to a boil. Since you're cooking with excess water, it takes a little longer to get the water boiling. While the water's heating up, you can wash the rice and the quinoa and then let it drain. Once the water comes to a boil, add some salt and your quinoa and rice mix and set a timer for 10 minutes. After about 10 minutes, give your rice a taste to check for doneness. I recommend having a little bit of a bite to it still, a bit like when you're doing al dente pasta. You don't want it to be too firm, but it will continue cooking after you drain it. Once you're happy with the level of cooking, drain it and then put it back in the pot. Then put the pot back on the stove with the lid on the lowest heat setting for 5 minutes. This helps absorb any excess water and will finish the cooking. Then turn off the heat and let it rest for another 5 minutes. Finally, I like to add some olive oil to then fluff it up with a fork. By the way, if you can get your hands on some multicolored quinoa, this can help make your rice look and taste even better. Now, when it comes to brown rice, you can mix any type of brown rice you like. Since brown rice still has a shell intact, it is a lot more difficult to overcook. Mixing different types of whole grain rice is a really easy way to make it look and taste more interesting. However, if you're not used to eating brown rice, I would suggest you ease into it, since massively increasing your fiber intake can have dire consequences for all of your loved ones. For this recipe, I am mixing some short and long grain brown rice with some wild rice. I like to buy different types of brown rice and just keep them mixed in a mason jar to save time. Now cooking brown rice is just like cooking white rice, it just takes a little longer. Start by measuring your rice, water, and salt. I'm making 3 portions, so I'm using 300 grams of rice, 545 milliliters of water, and 6 grams of salt. This is based on a recipe from my rice calculator, so if you haven't checked that out, you can find the link in the description below. Now brown rice doesn't have any surface starch, so it doesn't need to be roasted or fried. However, I do like to roast it in some olive oil because I like the flavor it gives to it, but this step is completely optional. Then just add the water and bring it to a boil while stirring, cover it with a lid, and cook on low heat for 40 minutes. Then turn off the heat and let it rest for 10 minutes. I then like to use a fork to fluff it up with some olive oil. Now you can see here the different sizes and colors you get from mixing different types of brown rice, which makes the whole dish a lot more interesting without costing you any extra time. Now the second method I want to show you is flavoring the oil. This method works best with white rice because it absorbs the flavors better, but you can try it with brown rice and let me know how it went on the comments below. Start by measuring the rice, water, and salt as usual. I'm making 3 portions, so I'm using 300 grams of rice, 525 milliliters of water, and 6 grams of salt. Then I'm going to flavor the oil using 6 cardamom pods and half a teaspoon of coriander seeds. I like to crush the cardamom pods to release a bit more flavor. I'm also going to mix the salt with a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder and onion powder. Set a pan on medium heat and add about a tablespoon of olive oil. Once the oil is hot, add the spices, stirring to keep it from burning. This helps make the spices more flavorful and fragrant. Then add the white rice to cook any surface starch, making sure it's all covered in oil. Then add your salt with garlic and onion powder and stir for about another minute. Then just add the water, bring it to a boil, and cook on low heat with the lid on for 10 to 15 minutes. Then turn off the heat and let it rest for another 5 minutes. I like to remove the spices before eating the rice, and now is a perfect time to do it since they're all on top. Now just add some butter and fluff it all up with a fork. Look at this perfect rice. I know you can't tell, but this also smells and tastes amazing. The great thing about this method is that you can use any combination of herbs and spices to get the flavor you like. If you have any suggestions, please let us know in the comments below. Finally, method 3, coloring your rice. There are a lot of ways to color rice, but this one adds so much flavor and so much color, I really do hope you try it. To color this rice red, I'm gonna make a red broth. Start by measuring your ingredients the same way you would when making white rice, using chicken stock instead of water. These are my 2 favorite chicken stocks I use for cooking. The one on the left is used for professional gastronomy, but you can easily find it on Amazon, and it will last you for months. The one on the right you can find in most supermarkets, and it's already portioned into 500 milliliter portions. In case you're wondering, in spite of my 51 subscribers and 6 YouTube videos, neither of these 2 brands has offered to sponsor me. To make the red broth, I'll be using a blender, but you can use an immersion blender or a food processor if you prefer. Add 200 grams of canned tomatoes, 2 teaspoons of tomato paste, a garlic clove, half a red onion, and about half a teaspoon of chili flakes. Add enough chicken broth to cover and blend for about a minute. Now you may have noticed I haven't added the salt yet, because different types of chicken broth have different amounts of salt, and I don't want the rice to come out tasting too salty. Now that the mixture's done blending, pour it back with the remaining broth. Now if you're looking at this, you might think that is way too much water for that amount of rice, but just consider there's a lot of solid blended into this. Trust me, it will turn out just fine. Now set a pan on medium heat and add some olive oil. While the oil is heating, I will peel and chop 1 carrot, then add the rice to the oil to cook any surface starch. I'm adding some salt now because I've tasted the broth and it's not salty enough. Then add the broth and bring it to a boil while stirring to keep it from sticking. Now give your broth a final taste for seasoning, then cover the rice and cook on low heat for 15 minutes. Then turn off the heat and let it rest for 5 minutes. Uncover the lid and oh no, what's this? Don't worry, this is perfectly normal. Just mix it with a fork, then put the lid back on and let it rest for a further 10 to 15 minutes to absorb the rest of the broth. This is a beautiful and vibrant red color, and it really tastes amazing. So I hope you try it. It's a really easy way to add an accent to your dish. What I love about these techniques is that it can make something you're very familiar with into something new and interesting with very little work. You can find all of the recipes on this video in the description below, as well as all of the recipes we've ever made on our website, back2.cooking. All meaning like 6, but it's growing. Now for part 3, I will be making my all-time favorite rice recipe, Mexican green rice. Make sure you hit subscribe to be notified when it's out. If you haven't checked out part 1, click here. And if you haven't checked out our poaching eggs videos, click here. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you in the next one.